Hey there everyone, this is Kristen, and this month's Mystic Craft is a Palmistry Altar Stand. So I'm just showing it to you, and you can see I had my card sitting on there. And so I created it really for holding cards, tarot oracle cards, but you can put any number of things into this little stand. And I'm going to give you just kind of a quick run through of all of the steps that I use to make this. If you don't want to make a palmistry version like this, you can always just do something different with your hand. You see with this one I just made a spiral. I'm doing a spiral in the center of that one. So it's going to be a bunch of supplies. The supply list and other information will be in the classroom. So let's get started. First of all, I want you to just see how thick this is. And what I'm using is an air modeling clay. So this is what I'm using. You'll probably need at least half of this to make just one of these. And you can see about the thickness that I used. I've made this one, I think, a little bit thicker. And the one I'm making now might be a little bit smaller. But let me just kind of take you through the steps really quickly. So what you want to do is take that modeling clay and you want to roll it out. If you have something to roll it out with, that's great. I've been using this bottle. Okay, so it would be better if there weren't any, label on it, but it has worked just fine. So you're just going to flatten it out. You're going to roll it out until you get something that is large enough for your hand. And I'm just stopping right at the wrist. So once you have something that is large enough for your hand, then you're going to outline it. And think first about how wide you want your fingers to be. Really wide, or do you want them kind of closer together? So you can see with these two that this one, I had my fingers closer together, and this one, the fingers were farther apart. And do think about it in terms of being able to get in between those fingers so you can paint and do all that kind of stuff. So I think I'm going to make mine a little bit far apart. I think I'm going to turn it this way just so I can make sure I get my whole hand. And then what I'm using is this little pointed dowel. And this is just to make the outline. So you're just going to draw around each finger. Make sure I spread my fingers out a little bit. And we're going to go back over this with a cutting knife so you don't have to be, super precise just yet. And bring my little finger in just a little bit. And bring it all the way down to the wrist. I'm just going to take my hand out and I'm just going to draw the rest of the wrist. And you can see there's an outline here. Just making this part a little bit darker. But at this point, it's not going to matter too much because you want to cut it out. And I'm just using a cutting tool here. And the way that I cut this out, I'm thinking about it as cutting, and I have a cutting board underneath of this too. And what I do this on, I didn't mention this before, is just parchment paper. I like to do pretty much all my artwork on parchment paper. Please be careful with your knife. But when I say I'm pulling away, I'm just taking everything and just kind of set it to the side. So think about your session as, think about this as actually pulling away, like kind of cutting away. And you want to do this just in little sections as well. So like I was saying, I pretty much use parchment paper for most of my crafts. It's great because things don't stick to it. So even if you have something sticky like glue, it won't stick to the parchment paper. I use it with paint when I'm painting things. It works really well with this clay because it doesn't stick. You can lift it up, and as you're rolling out your clay, I like to pick it up and turn it over. And so you can just lift it up easily. You don't have to do anything crazy to get it up off of the parchment. So again, as I'm working around, I'm not trying to just do, you see I'm just kind of doing sections. You don't really need to try to do the whole thing at once. Just kind of do everything in little sections. And you can go back and do these kind of little pieces. So don't worry about the little pieces. I don't want this to be too tiny, that little finger. So I've got a little extra bit here. I'm just going to kind of press it to the side. Just going to kind of press it down. Now, as you're working with this, it's still very moist, so you can go in and clean up some of the little edges. Just very carefully pulling off of this, and again you can clean off the top here. But you don't really have to do too much, because what you're going to do next, so now you have your hand. I like to do the palmistry one on the wrinkly side just because it looks more like a real hand. So, you may want to turn it over and see which side do you want to, to actually have your design on. And then once you figured that out, then I start actually putting these lines in. So if you look closely here, you can see these are actually crevices. So these are lines that I have used my little dowel tool when it was just like this, when I've just created it, and I went in and I etched those out. So that's what you'll want to do next, and figure out which lines you want to include. You can see I've included the life line, the head line, the fate line, the heart line, and then I also added the girdle of Venus up at the top. Now you'll also see on each finger, I've added the little sections for each finger too, and those I also went through and did little crevices. Okay, so I actually made an indentation in all of these areas. And then once you've done that step, and for you, maybe you want to do something different. You can see with this one, I did a spiral in the center of the hand. So maybe there's some other design that you want to do. Now is the time to etch it in. So you want to do whatever etching that you want to do. With this one, I'm not exactly sure what I want to do because I've already done 2 different designs. But what I'm going to do next is show you what you're going to do after you've done your etching. So you do want to etch it in first. And then the next thing, let me just put all this aside. And this stuff you can hold on, put it into like a plastic bag so you can save it and do something else with it later. So like I said, once you've done your etching of your palm, and again, you can pick whichever side you like, the etched side is going to go face down on something curved. Now I got these, it's just a little bowl from the dollar store. So I think these were all in one set, these 4 bowls for $1. And it makes a really nice bowl to use for this because it's a good size, and you'll also notice that the whole bowl is curved. There's no like indentations or weird things, so it's just a nice round curve. And what we're going to do, again, whatever your etch side is, you've already done all of your etching. You're going to take that side and place it down on top of the bowl, and you're going to just gently curl the hand over the bowl. So it should look like, it should look like this. I don't know if you can see it very well, but you should see a curve. And I'm just going to kind of gently curve the entire thing. Now I like to use several bowls because you'll notice that the fingers will hang down, and I don't want them to touch the, I don't want them to be pressed up by the table or anything like that. So you do want to raise it up a little bit. So I'm just kind of shaping and just nicely shaping around, just a really gentle kind of shaping. If you want the fingers spread out anymore, this would be the time you could do a little bit of finagling with that. Make sure that the roundness of the bowl is in the placement that you want. Actually, might move this a little bit more. And I'm just kind of, again, just doing a gentle press just to keep it in that position. So once you've done this, you're just going to, again, have it on something that's a little bit raised so that the fingers aren't being pressed against, up against. And then you're just going to set it aside somewhere to dry. Now, I have been drying for 24 hours on one side, and then after 24 hours I take it up off of this and turn it over, so because it's dry enough to set. But it usually has taken me about 3 days, I would say. So you want to dry it for at least 2 to 3 days, just in a nice sunny area. Now I'm just going to set this aside. Now this one I have dried for about 3 days, and when I turned it over after the first day, the center was still a little bit soft, which was a good thing because some of my lines had gotten smushed a little bit. So I had to go back in and open those lines, those crevices up. And even when it's pretty dry, you can still go through it and open it up a little bit more. So if you need to do that, do that. And I would say make your crevices pretty deep. I mean, not crazy, but you don't want them to just be on the surface. You want them to be deep enough so that they really will kind of stick. I find that when it dries, they look a little bit more shallow. So once you've gotten it to this point, what I'm going to do now, you can see there are a lot of little rough edges and areas. I sand it. So I'm using just like some sandpaper or a sand block to sand it. And I would recommend using something like this to cover your mouth and nose, so you don't breathe any of this in, because it can get, there's a lot of dust that kind of goes around when you sand it. Now, for the crevices, once it's sanded, then I use some gesso, and I coat it all in gesso first. The gesso just primes it for painting. So it will just be, you know, maybe one. You really don't need more than one coat of gesso on it. And then you're ready to paint. In order to get this particular color, okay, what I did, this underlying color, what I did was I mixed a brown with the gesso to get the color that I wanted. What I also do when I'm applying the paint, because you can see it has like a mottled kind of finish. And the way that I get that is when I'm painting it, even with the gesso, I use a sponge of some sort. So I'm sponging it like this. And that way you don't get a smooth finish, you get kind of a, you get a spongier look. You get something that looks a little bit more textured, which is what I like. But that may not be your preference. So after you've painted it, what I did to get the, I don't know if you can see it, but there's the darkness in each of the crevices. So what I did to do that, once I painted it, I gessoed it first, then I covered it with paint. To get these lines, I took some black acrylic paint and I mixed it with water. So I'm just showing you right here. And I mixed it so that it's, you know, it's watery. I'm just going to put a little bit in here. And what I did was I just, you see how it just, put it in the center in these crevices, and the water just runs. And hopefully you can see that. And then what I did was just blotted it. I'm going to turn it upside down. And this one is actually doing really, really well. So you can see how dark the crevices are, but everything else is just kind of blotted, like a little blotted look. And so that's really what I wanted, the really dark crevices. And like I said, it worked well. Instead of trying to just paint in there, to water down that paint, and then you can get into the crevices. Now, the other thing that I did, you can probably see it better, it has like a grungy kind of look. So you can see it a little better probably on the edges. So it's that skin tone color, and then on top of that, it looks really grungy, okay? So my steps were, again, gesso, then paint. Then I did the crevices with the paint and water, and did a little bit of blotting. Then what I did was I drew in these glyphs and wrote in this information, and I did that with a black Posca pen. I did that with a black fine Posca pen. And then once that was done, to finish it, actually not to finish it, but to give it that grungy look, I took this same black acrylic paint and water mixture, and I just took some of it and put it onto a rag just like this. This is just a regular paper towel, and I kind of dabbed it a little bit first, and then I dabbed it directly onto the painted. Okay, and you can see again it picks up all of the texture that's already here, and it gives it like a really grungy kind of look. So that's how I did the whole thing, and then I did seal it, and I just sealed it with the matte Mod Podge when I was completely done. So there you have it. Those are all of the steps that I used. Again, in the classroom you'll have some information. You can always look online just to find a palmistry map. I just found one that I liked. I really wanted to have all of the zodiac glyphs here, but there are some more elaborate maps that have other like planetary glyphs throughout. So you can decide, you know, how much you want to actually put onto your palmistry hand or how little. And again, you can just take the same template for this and do a completely different design if you want. So I hope you enjoy your Palmistry Altar Stand.